something NATO leaders heard a couple of days ago. Take a listen.
I have been very, very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance in saying that NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations.
Now, some saying that's a lot like President Reagan sounded during one of his trips to Europe. Take a listen to that.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Well, a man who actually wrote those lines joins us now, former Ronald Reagan speechwriter Peter Robinson, joining us from Stanford, California. Peter, let's just get out of the way. First of all, Trump is no Reagan. We understand that. We get that. But Trump has done, particularly on this trip, and not only what he said in Europe, but what he said to the Arab leaders: drive them out, these terrorists in your midst, drive them out, these purveyors of death. We had this assumption that this is just something we have to live with, that terrorism will be with us forever. This president is saying, not so. We can end the terrorist threat, the terrorist crisis that we have been in. Very much like Ronald Reagan said, we don't have to live with the Cold War. We can win it. To which you say?
To which I say that's exactly, the parallel is precisely correct, David. There's a marvelous moment, 1977, I believe it was, when the president was going over foreign policy matters. He was between serving as governor and had not yet been elected president, but he was talking over foreign policy matters with Dick Allen, a friend of yours and mine, who served in the Reagan administration. And Dick told me the story years later that the president said, by the way, Dick, would you like to hear my theory of the Cold War? Dick Allen said, of course, Mr. President. And Ronald Reagan said, well, my theory of the Cold War is we win and they lose. And it was just as tight and blunt as that. And now we have, in Donald Trump, he's not as polished a speaker. As you said, he's not Ronald Reagan. But that central insistence, it's a kind of moral imagination. He's willing to invite people to see a world in which we don't have to put up with this anymore.
Right.
We can win, and they can lose.
And we were literally told by the Obama administration that this is just something we have to live with. This president says, no, it's not. We can fight it and we can win against it.
That's exactly right. And again, there's the parallel, again, is very striking. Jimmy Carter gave a speech at Notre Dame years ago in which he warned Americans against the inordinate fear of communism, the notion that we would have to learn to live with them, that they'd be around for a long time, we'd be around for a long time. And Ronald Reagan came in and simply changed the way people thought about the matter. Likewise, once again, Barack Obama, your conversation with Jim Woolsey and Jack Keane, as so often happens on Fox News, the essential point got made. Barack Obama engaged in a long retreat from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world got more dangerous. Along comes Donald Trump, and say what you want about his speaking style, about this or that, the leaks. All that is secondary. He is reasserting the American place in the world.
Right. And some people already belittle the drive them out speech in Saudi Arabia, which meant so much in changing the direction of the U.S. in relation to our Arab allies. He didn't write it, obviously, his speech writers, but Ronald Reagan didn't write tear down that wall. You did. You wrote those lines. But the president chooses what to say. And I know that there were people that were opposed to him saying, Ronald Reagan saying what you wrote, correct?
Pretty nearly the entire foreign policy apparatus of the United States government, David, opposed that speech. The State Department, the National Security Council, the ranking diplomat on the ground in Berlin, all opposed that speech. Colin Powell and I went nose to nose. Colin Powell was the #2 in the National Security Council staff at that time. And it was Ronald Reagan. I wouldn't have written that speech for anyone other than Ronald Reagan. We speechwriters were always trying to give Ronald Reagan back to himself, so to speak. We knew his mind, what he would respond to. And so I wouldn't have written that for anybody else, and nobody else would have overruled the foreign policy apparatus to insist on delivering that speech. Likewise, the Trump administration. I don't know the speechwriters there well, but I have had a couple of conversations with Stephen Miller, and it is very clear that they're not trying to invent Donald Trump. They're trying to take the policies they understand the principles that he believes in,
right,
the speaking style that he has so well, that was well formed. Donald Trump isn't trying, they're not trying to invent a voice, they're not trying to invent policies. They're writing material that comports with Donald Trump himself.
Peter, stay with us. We have another gentleman who is quite familiar with the way White House